the best scenario to describe vulnerability is when you hand a gun to someone else, point it onto your head, and you pray that they don't shoot. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of my podcast, Vulnerable Conversations, with yours truly, Mayan. This podcast has been a long time coming. I have been hearing this call of creating even more space to welcome all these conversations that we don't have enough of, or conversations that just don't really have the space for that. And what better way than the first episode being all about vulnerability? And this is something that is very strong in my mission in life, is to not just connect people, but to unlock their vulnerability. Because for me, human connection, which is my bottom line in life, the core of human connection to me is being vulnerable. So, what is being vulnerable? There's a difference between being open and being vulnerable. And this is something I'm extremely passionate about. Because what I hear these days is there's so many people throwing the word vulnerability here and there, almost, I wouldn't say recklessly, but irresponsibly. Being open is, yes, you're able to talk about difficult experiences, you can narrate a few things that have happened in your life. Being vulnerable is something completely different, and that is something that we will be talking about today. About 2 years ago, there was a girl who came to one of my workshops, and this workshop was all about setting boundaries with your family. And this is a topic that really resonated with her. Now, as the workshop kept going through the night, it was a few hours, as we kept peeling layers into this conversation I had with her, I asked her a question that I think a lot of people take for granted or just use it to brush it off a conversation, and ask her, how are you? How do you feel? And she goes, I feel okay. I said, okay. How does okay feel in your body? That stumped her. And she didn't know how to answer how okay felt in her body. And so we sat there for a few minutes and thought about how do we then translate emotions and how we feel in our body. Because I think that is where vulnerability comes in, is you're not just being able to talk about how you feel, but actually feel how you feel in your body. And she wasn't able to answer that. And that is the difference, because she was so proud of someone who can easily talk about anything in life. I even asked her, do you consider yourself vulnerable? And she automatically, without a pause, goes, yes, of course, I'm vulnerable. I can talk about this, I can talk about that. I'm an open book, was her strongest point. And she goes, ask me anything. And I said, that's great. It's great to be open. But that, to me, is just being open, and that's not really vulnerable. So this made her stop and think. And she leaned in and asked, so what is vulnerability? And I think the best scenario to describe vulnerability is when you hand a gun to someone else, point it onto your head, and you pray that they don't shoot. Vulnerability is literally a weak spot, is allowing yourself to be open and expose yourself. That is a great word, expose yourself. And that to her was something really impactful, what I said. And we sat there for a few minutes, just letting that sink in. Because we can go on and on and on about a list of things that have happened in our lives, difficult situations, etc. But if you cannot sit down and feel how did these experiences impact you, that is the layer that you need to go lower. Beyond just being open, be vulnerable. How did it feel in your body? What I typically ask people is that when you start feeling emotions, whether you're happy, sad, angry, resentment, whatsoever, do a quick body scan, just like you do in yoga and meditation. Do a quick body scan, and where does it hurt? That's the question. Where in your body does it hurt when you think about a difficult situation, when you think about a difficult emotion? This brings me to a question that a lot of people ask. Why are people so afraid to be vulnerable? There's 2 points I want to cover there. One, as we all know, society has given us this idea that if you show emotions, it's weakness. And so we're afraid to look weak. This goes especially for men. That's why men aren't able to open up a lot, because they're not seen to be emotional creatures. Women are seen as emotional creatures. So when women start expressing emotions, it's okay. But then when a man does it, it's not. And so we're living in this idea that being vulnerable is weakness. And to me, if anything, being vulnerable is actually a lot harder than running away from emotions. And that leads me to point number 2. It is extremely painful, physically painful, to be vulnerable. Because when you start feeling your emotions, when you start landing your emotions into your body, it hurts. I don't know if you've experienced this. I think plenty of us have experienced heartbreak. When you feel heartbreak, there's this compression in your chest where you just feel like you can't even stand up. You feel so small, you're hurt, it's hurting. There's so much tension here. And that hurts to feel. A lot of people use alcohol and drugs and even sex to run away from emotions because their body cannot handle it. So if anyone is being vulnerable, that is strength, because you are able to physically handle the effect of these emotions and what you're feeling. So for me, when people choose to be vulnerable, they choose to have this sort of release. And that release is difficult, but that's the only way to get over any difficult emotions, is release. You can't keep it inside. There's a way, there has to be a way for it to come out. And so vulnerability then is, to me, that's the only way I know how to live. Vulnerability for me is, I can't go back anymore, because I know that every time I experience difficult situations, I know that the only way out is through. A lot of people have asked me this multiple times. I can't even count how many times, and asked me, how have I reached this point in my life and have not given up? And that I still have this zest, this excitement for life and what's moving forward. And it's because I have been able to go through all these emotions, these difficult emotions. If we don't process that, it will continue eating you up inside. This was what happened to me when I was younger, where I didn't know how to process emotions, like most of us don't at 12, 14 years old. And so for many years that compounded all those difficult emotions. Finally, I had a breaking point when I was about 19 years old. And I felt so much release. I just felt like that was not all I needed to heal, but one of the biggest ways to heal was that. And so I realized this is exactly how I just want to live. I don't want to keep holding on to these difficult emotions. There has to be a way for it to come out, whether it's screaming or talking to someone, or what I discovered much later on, breath work, meditation, yoga, all these movement, right? I just needed to go. I get it now when people want to travel when they feel bad. To a certain degree, when people overdo it, it becomes escapism. But there is a reason why traveling outside, going outside, taking a walk, doing sports helps with your difficult emotions, because it is a physical release. But there are layers to that as well. It's not just about physical release. You also have to be able to talk about these emotions. This is where vulnerability can help you get through what's going on inside. So then what is vulnerability? Is it a state of mind? Is it a state of being? Both can be true, because a state of mind is something that is affected by environment. It is something that can be changed. But being vulnerable can be a state of being as well. If this is the core of how you deal with emotions, that is your state of being. And this is something that I always recommend for people to live life, is just to be vulnerable to your core. Do you have to be vulnerable to everyone? No. I don't think anyone can just be accepting of your vulnerability. I don't think anyone can handle your vulnerability. So just because it is your state of being, it's who you are, it doesn't mean that you can be or should be vulnerable to everyone. It still needs the right space, the right mindset when it comes to being able to open up. I would call myself a very vulnerable person, but I don't go out and just what we call trauma dump on people, right? There's a difference between trauma dumping and actually being vulnerable and talking about this. For me, trauma dumping, it's almost like being so completely open about what's happened, but then you're irresponsibly unloading on other people. But in a vulnerable situation, in a vulnerable conversation that you can have with your peers, your friends, your family, and even with yourself, you can have vulnerable conversations with yourself as well. It is important to understand that you're not just saying things, you're feeling them, you're letting them land, and you're giving yourself a form of release. Because that way, your mind stops being so clouded with all these difficult emotions, all these difficult thoughts, and you're able to go through and think of what is the next step that I can do to move on, to heal from this situation. Vulnerability, or rather, even just emotions in general, this is not something society taught us how to handle. Not our parents, not our school, not anyone. So obviously, when I was between the ages of 12 was the furthest in my memory I can remember. That was extremely difficult for me because I didn't understand how I was feeling. I was transitioning into, obviously, when you hit puberty, 12, 13, you are being exposed to even more complex emotions and not just sad, happy, angry, whatsoever. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I had this experience with my family. We went on a trip. And in that trip, we were about to go home and I begged my mom, can I please stay? I don't want to go back. And surprisingly, she wasn't against this. She allowed me to stay with my uncle. And my uncle jokingly said, maybe he was joking, maybe he was serious, maybe he was teasing me or bullying me. But he basically said, stop being so dramatic. Because all I could remember was just staring out into the sea. I didn't know how to process things. And as the years go by, the more that I've dealt with difficult situations, finding out about my real father at 14, losing friends within a matter of months, including family, I just didn't know how. I felt what I would call emotionally constipated. And this is something, actually, the girl who came to my workshop, she considered herself emotionally constipated. And now that I think about it, I was emotionally constipated. There was so much stuck inside me. Poor reference, but it is that. For many, many years, every time something difficult happened, I just felt more tense. I just felt like a rock getting harder by the day, by the year. And when I finally was able to learn how to manage these emotions, mind you, this isn't something that I learned overnight. So I don't expect everyone to decide today I'm going to be vulnerable and the next day, easy peasy. It's a process that could take so long that if you are not willing to face the pain, it will be hard and it will take a lot longer for you to process all of this. And especially if you start your healing journey a lot more later in your life, in your 30s, I can only imagine all that you've harbored for at least 2 decades. And the fact that you haven't processed that, it's not easy. I didn't go through an easy life dealing with emotions, but I can tell you it is extremely rewarding. How my life was back then when it comes to dealing with emotions, I just can't go back. To me, there's so much pain when I start feeling emotions. If there's pain in my body, I just can't function. And that's what happens when a lot of people start experiencing a lot of bad or difficult experiences, and then it compounds. All these emotions compound. Of course you're going to be paralyzed. Of course it's hard to think about the future. It's hard to think about what can I do for myself? What can I do to get out of this situation? It's hard because you've compounded all those emotions. But it takes one tiny step. Right now, I invite you to close your eyes and think of just one emotion. And if you're not able to go specifically into what emotion it is, that's fine. Let's say you're angry, and under anger, and this is something I used to feel a lot of, is resentment. Let's say it's resentment. Then ask yourself, where in your body does it hurt? And once you can recognize that, then you can start really meeting that emotion and asking it, how can I heal you? How can we work together to get over this resentment? And the second that you start even being vulnerable with yourself, being honest with yourself, and this is something that even to this day, I still remind myself to be vulnerable with myself as well. I think for a few months, I didn't admit to it, and it caught up with me. I think it was about a couple months ago where I broke down because I finally admitted to myself that I was angry. Because anger is something that I don't like. Who likes being angry? Who likes screaming? Who likes this difficult emotion of anger? And it's such a strong emotion that I frankly thought I wasn't angry, or probably it was just because I was pregnant and I didn't have the luxury of feeling anger, because when you're pregnant, your baby feels every emotion. I didn't want to do that to my baby. And so when she was born a couple months later, I think I finally broke and recognized that I was angry. And what this did to me was honestly such a relief, because once you can pinpoint to that emotion, once you can actually recognize that emotion, you can let it go. So if you're going through something right now that is very difficult, I get it. When you cannot even name an emotion, it's hard. So first off, be kind with yourself. Second of all, let's try to name that emotion. Third, let's try to process that emotion and how you think it's best. Now that you've recognized it, only you know what can you do moving forward. What can you do for yourself to help you heal? Because as much as we want to reach outside, as much as we, talk to all our friends, and I've done this, as much as we want to talk to your friends, your family, even to a therapist, you can talk to everyone you can possibly talk to and chew their ears off. But at the end of the day, if you cannot be vulnerable and honest with yourself, and if you cannot help yourself, there's just no moving forward.
Where do you feel it now in your body?
Here.
I sense it.
Allow me to sit with my emotions. What do you say to someone who refuses to feel emotions because they're so afraid that it's going to eat them up and swallow them, and that they'll never get out to the other end? I think that situation is just like any other situation where you just need to trust. We need to take that leap of faith in the process, trusting the process, what they say, right? It's not just with emotions. Let's say to some languages that most people would understand, even in a business, do you know it's going to fail or not? But if you're so passionate about it, you want to go in and make it work. Even in a relationship, gosh, something that we can all relate to. In a relationship, would you know that it's going to work or not? You don't, but you trust it anyway and see where it goes. I think with emotions, it's the same thing. It's scary, I know, because like I said, because you have compounded so much emotions over the decades, it's going to feel scary, because once you start feeling in your body, all of it is going to come rushing through at once. But trust the process. It will be better at the other side. You will get through. These are 3 things that I consider to be components of vulnerability. What do you walk in with vulnerability? One is trust. Trust that it's all going to be okay. You have to trust, because you will never find out unless you just dive into it and see where it goes. Second is courage. I don't blame you at all if you think this is scary, if you think that this is not something that you can handle. But courage does not mean the absence of fear. You can still be afraid, but choose instead that even if you're afraid, you're still going to go for it. You have trust, you have courage, and this is the last thing. Just surrender. Surrender to the experience. Like any other experience, just have to surrender to what these emotions are able to show you. Once you're able to go through these emotions and process them, I have this image in my head, this full surrender of just like opening up your body, spread your arms around, just look up and just receive. Surrender to the experience. If you have these in mind in three, you're one step closer to vulnerability. Now, there are so many things from this episode itself that we can take out of and talk about into detail. Trust, setting boundaries. When does it become too much when it comes to vulnerability? But let's leave it here. Let's leave it at what is true vulnerability. How can we start? How can we take that first step into healing? The next time you start feeling big emotions, strong emotions, try not to run away from it. Try to just sit, breathe, and start scanning your body. Where does it feel? Where does it hurt? It could be in your arms, it could be in your neck. And just from there, find ways that you can move to help that. Talk to yourself. Be vulnerable with yourself. Why am I feeling these emotions? So you go, where does it hurt in your body? Why am I feeling these emotions? And what can I do to help me get to the other side? So if this sparked something in you, if it moved something in you, let's talk. And if there's any topic that you want us to talk about, something vulnerable, something real, something raw and authentic, let me know. And I'll see you in the next one.